I want us to move on to software. What is software again? Tells the hardware what to do. Software is what tells the hardware what to do. I told you when we talked about software, there were different categories, right? And I have them listed here: operating systems versus application software. And there are more categories than that, but on a general sense, again, this is a pretty high-level class. I'm not expecting you to get too deep into it. But I want you to at least be able to tell me the difference between an operating system and an application software. So let's start by defining operating systems. What is an operating system? You can give me the brand names if you want. What are the operating systems we have choices of? Yeah, Windows 7, OS 10, right? OS X, Leopard, Lion, Snow Leopard, whatever the code names. Lion's the new one that's coming out, right? Those of you that follow the Mac. The two most primary ones, the most popular ones, are first Windows series of operating systems, with Windows 7 being the newest and I'll have to say the best one they've come up with. Previous incarnations were Vista and XP and Windows, I even forget them all now, 98 and so on, 95, all the way back to the very first version of Windows. I remember Windows 2 and Windows 3 way back in the day and thinking, maybe this graphical thing is going to work. I still remember that. There are other operating systems besides that, most notably Linux or Unix, but Linux is the one that works on a PC. Has anybody used a Linux system, like an Ubuntu? Yes? Did you build, which one did you use? Ubuntu? Yeah, okay. And it's what's called open source software, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on open source today because we actually will be talking about it separately when we get into things like copyright and so on. We're going to talk about something called open source software. But the basic idea behind open source software is what the Homebrew Computer Club was doing, and I want to just point that out now to remind you guys. Do you remember when we were in the jacuzzi, okay, with that guy? He talked about how when there was a problem that the whole group had, that if somebody solved it, what did they do? Did they come back and say, I'll sell it to you for $10? No, they just would come back and say, here's how you make this work on the computer. And there was this kind of community spirit of let's all work together to make this work. Well, the open source movement comes out of some of those same ideas. The idea is we need to share our ideas and make them available. We shouldn't hide them behind walls and charge for them. And so one of the biggest problems open source software people have was with people like Bill Gates and Microsoft. They say, why are you charging so much money for software when in fact these things are just ideas, and ideas should be shared, they should be free, we should be working together to make the world a better place. It's just two different philosophies, and there's books and all kinds of things written on these things. There's business models and all of that written behind all of this. But I just want you to remember that, because we're going to come back, and in fact, in your reading in a few days, there's actually a letter that Bill Gates wrote to the Homebrew Computer Club, and you can actually read, I think it's a scan of the actual letter that he wrote, saying, well, wait a minute, why shouldn't I be allowed to charge for something I spent lots of time doing? So he has his kind of, well, wait, I got to be paid for finding out the solution to this problem. So just be thinking about that. So you have in software, you have operating systems, and we've talked about different ones. So before we talk about application software, sticking with operating systems, what does Windows do? What does Mac OS X do? What do you actually do with it? What can you accomplish with it? Just Windows by itself, not Office, not iTunes, not Photoshop, but the actual Windows. If you just install Windows by itself, what can you do? Okay, so because you have it, you can load other software on, right? All right. Anything else that it does? What can you do with it? All right, so it comes with a few little tools, notepad, calculator, writepad, or whatever they're called. But the bottom line is an operating system isn't built to actually allow you to accomplish a task. It's built to allow you to use the computer. The operating system is what allows you to run the computer. It's the first level of software on the computer. So when you turn the computer on, what does it do? It goes and finds the operating system. If you don't have an operating system loaded, and some of you, if you've built a computer, may have seen this, if you turn on a computer with no software on it, it will tell you that it's failed trying to find an operating system. The operating system is kind of the life of the computer. It loads the operating system, which then allows you to use the computer. The operating system then allows you to do things like change screen resolution, right? It allows you to hook up printers. It allows you to hook up other devices to the computer. So the operating system's main goal is to allow you to use the computer. Now let's contrast that with application software. Application software is like Microsoft Word or Office in general, iTunes, a web browser. What would you say those all have in common? Yeah, they allow you to actually do something useful, fulfill a task. I want to write a paper, I use Word. I want to create a presentation, I can use PowerPoint or Keynote. I want to listen to music. We've got several different software packages, iTunes, for example. I want to listen to a podcast, can use iTunes. I want to, work on my pictures. I can use Picasso, or I can use Photoshop, or whatever. You guys all have your favorite software to do different things. I want to access the internet. I need a web browser. These are application software. So what I want you to understand under this operating systems versus application software, I want you to understand the main difference is that an application is built for you to accomplish something. It fills a need. An operating system is just what allows you to use the computer. But you have to have the operating system first. The operating system is the basic level. If you were drawing a diagram, and I think you'll see this in your reading, you have the operating system, and on top of that you have applications. Now, I have up there Mac versus PC, so I just want to spend a minute on that. We got to see the founders of both companies in our video. We got to see Bill Gates, and we got to see Steve Jobs, and Wozniak as well, right? Who isn't with the company anymore, but he's definitely originally a part of it. But Steve Jobs said something very interesting, didn't he? About the spirit of a product, and you can put that spirit into the product. When you guys think of Macs versus PCs, what do you think of the difference? What is some of the differences between the two? Well, first of all, how many of you guys are Mac people, have Apple computers? About half, a little more than half, maybe. The rest of you are Windows. You use Linux primarily, or are you Windows? Windows? Okay. So, not to start a war, because I like them both, honestly, but what would you say is the main difference between the two? The operating system. But what's the difference in those operating systems? The big decision and the big difference that was made several years ago was Apple decided they were going to build their hardware and their software. Who makes Apple computers? Who makes Macs? Only Apple, right? Does any other company out there make a computer that runs Macintosh software, at least legally? They don't. Same with the iPhone and what they call iOS, which is the operating system for the iPhone and the iPod Touch. Apple makes the hardware and the software. Now, think about that. They can completely control everything that goes into those devices. So when they write their software, they exactly know what the hardware is going to look like. Now, contrast that with Windows and what Windows is doing. Who makes Windows computers? Microsoft sure doesn't, right? Who makes them? Dell, HP, who knows? I don't even know all the different companies. There's hundreds of them, right? So what does Windows have to do, or Microsoft? They have to make an operating system that's going to be open wide enough that can work on all these different kinds of computers. So what happens? Sometimes it doesn't work right. Again, with previous versions especially. I think Windows 7, they've been able to clean some things up. So what we've got is a difference in philosophy in how it should happen. Now, what does Apple do? They can charge a premium for their product, right? And people are willing to pay it. Those of you who are business students, I mean, it's supply and demand pretty much. People perceive them as higher value, so they pay more for them. So I don't really have I have a preference. I like my Mac, honestly. But I also, I'm not sure if there's one better than the other. And I'm going to leave it at that right now. But I just wanted you guys to think about the difference. When Apple makes their products, they're building the hardware and the software, and they have complete control over everything. Even, if you guys have followed the controversy in the last couple of weeks, even what goes into the iTunes store, they have control over. So any app that can get onto the portable devices is controlled by Apple as well. And there was a controversy a couple weeks ago. A Christian group created an app that Apple allowed on and then later banned because it was anti-homosexual. And they banned it from the App Store. And so it's kind of caused a little bit of a stir. And we can get into that in another part of this class. But Apple they've decided they want full control over everything. Whereas Windows can't do that. And in fact, just last thing, the whole idea of the App Store for Apple has become so popular, they are now rolling out an App Store for the Macintosh computers as well. So you'll be able to go to an App Store, I'm assuming through iTunes, on your Mac and download apps onto your Mac, and you'll be buying all your software that way as opposed to, off the shelf or whatever. They're changing the model. I think they're going to change the model for everything with that this year probably. I want to go into my other discussion on buy versus build because I think this is really important for you guys to understand as well. So with software, there's operating systems and applications. We're actually going to spend some time on another day talking about enterprise software like Banner and SAP and those types of things. So I don't think we're totally glossing over that. But what I want you to think about now is how is software created? You guys know software is created through programming, right? And there's a little bit about programming in our video. But if you're a company, if you're Biola, okay, or you're a business, you have to decide how you want to get your software. Now, back in the old days, back in the 60s and 70s, really before my time too, if a company wanted software to do their accounting, or they wanted software to control their inventory, or they wanted software to do something particular for their company, they had an IS department and they had programmers and they would write the software. And it might take them 6 months, it might take them 2 years, it might take them longer. As computers have gotten faster, as computers have gone mainstream and PCs have gone mainstream, we have a lot of software companies now. Used to be you couldn't just go out and buy software, you just build it. Because what you did was so custom to your company, you didn't want anyone else to do it. But now what you have is you have software companies. Okay, so we think about it. I mean, Apple has their own software division. Think about we have Microsoft, right? IBM writes software. Adobe is a big software company. And there's lots and lots and lots of tiny little companies out there as well. So if you're a company, say you're Biola, you're an organization like Biola, or you're a business, big business, small business, and you need some software, you have to decide, how am I going to get that software? And I put up there, buy versus build. The main choice you have is buy the software from somebody or build it yourself. Now this actually turns out to be an extremely important decision. And the balance has tipped in favor of buy many, many years ago. It used to be, like I said, you wanted software, you had to write it yourself. But we're getting to the point now where it's cheaper to go out and buy it from a company or even to hire someone to come in and do it for you. But what do you think the implications of buy versus build are? If I'm Biola and I go out and I buy a software package. So let's say I go out and buy a WebReg system. Okay, you guys have all used WebReg, right? Let's say I've done the math. I've figured out if we're going to build a WebReg system ourselves, it's going to take 18 months, 2 people full time. And doing the math turns out to be a couple $100,000, maybe more. Or I can go out from a company that sells these things and buy it for $50,000. Pretty straightforward decision, you would think, right? But what are the implications of that? If you buy software from somebody, what does that mean about the way, let's say it's WebReg. What would that mean about the way you do registration? What's going to happen? Let's say registration, you guys all know how registration works. Let's say, you got step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. And you go out and buy this web registration package. And in that web registration package, it says you do step 1, step 3, step 4, step 7. Because they've done it differently than you did. If you're Biola, what do? You have to either spend $200,000 to write it yourself or $50,000 to buy it, but it's different. What happens if you buy the $50,000 package? What has to happen? What? Okay, change the software or change how you do your registration. Most companies will say, I don't want to change the software because that costs more money. I'll just change the way we do registration. So with the buy versus build decision, what you end up doing is finding out that, hey, you know what, if I buy that software, I might have to change the way I do whatever I do, but it's cheaper. This is where software and process come together. Remember the 5 parts of an information system: hardware, software, data, people, process. Well, the process part is extremely important because let's just say I'm now, instead of Biola's registration, now I'm a company that builds, I don't know, builds automobiles or let's make it something a little more interesting. I build MP3 players, okay? And I've got my process down to a perfect process. It's very inexpensive. We do everything the most efficient way possible, but we need some software to track how we do it. So we're going to go buy a manufacturing system that helps us track this process. And I can get it from vendor A or B, but no matter which one I buy, I have to change my process because they don't write their software exactly the way I do it. Now I'm still stuck, right? Because I'm either going to have to change my process, and if I do, I'll end up having my process just like my competitors because they bought the same software. And then they bought a different software, but they've got to change their process. Turns out that the software you buy would actually force you to become a less efficient company unless you decide to change the software or you write it yourself. So the buy versus build decision, the whole point of what I'm talking about here, the buy versus build decision is it's not always as straightforward as it looks. When you're buying software, you may end up finding it's cheaper to build it as opposed to changing your process. It's a key decision for managers, for people looking to bring in ERP systems like Banner. I don't know how many of you guys are familiar with the whole Banner thing we've been doing the last couple years here, but it's changing the way we do things. Why? Because that's how Banner wants us to do it. Now, in some cases, it's no big deal to change, the way something gets done because it's not going to be any lower quality. In fact, sometimes these systems have a higher quality process built in. But it's something to consider when you're acquiring software. You have to decide, do I want to buy it and change either the way I do things or change the software, or do I want to build it myself? And sometimes it still ends up, even though that $50,000 versus $200,000, it still may be cheaper to spend the $200,000 and do it in-house, which the very first version of WebReg we had here was built at Biola. And I think the current one, I don't know if you know this, Dave, is it built, do you know if it's, yeah, I think it's part of Banner now, though I think we may have customized it quite a bit. But that's the buy versus build decision, and it's not that easy. And what I want you guys to know about in software is it's a key decision that companies make. And most companies today are buying software. They're not writing it themselves, unless obviously they're a software company and that's what they do. But for managing the business, most companies are going out and buying software. And it has huge implications on the success of a company and how competitive you are. All right. That's really all I have for software. It was much shorter than hardware, I realize. But what I want you guys to get out of it was the difference. Well, what is software, right? It tells the computer what to do. The instructions that tell the computer what to do. You acquire software either by buying it as a company or building it. Those are the two main ways. And there's kind of variations on that. You can hire someone to build it for you. I mean, there are ways around that. But essentially, you're either buying a package and then having to modify something about how you work, or you're building it yourself. Now, the process for figuring out what your business processes are and then modifying or building software for it, that's called systems analysis, which is a class I'll be teaching this fall in the MIS emphasis called Systems Analysis and Design. And what we do is we take a business problem, analyze it, document it, diagram it, and then build software to do it. So again, something else that's in the MIS emphasis. But the hard part of that is figuring out how businesses do things. The easy part is the programming, really, and building it. The hard part is figuring out what the business problem is and what the process is. Operating system versus application software. You need to be able to tell me which is which. Okay? If I say Windows, you need to be able to say operating system. If I say software that allows you to accomplish a specific task, application.